Hi everybody, and welcome to the newest podcast of the Canadian Open Neuroscience Platform, CONP. For this edition of the podcast, we sat down with Ben Inglis, an MR physicist and the manager of the magnetic resonance facilities at the Henry H. Wheeler Jr. Brain Imaging Center at UC Berkeley in California. Ben is a unique voice in the MRI community, contributing a number of tutorials about functional MRI through his popular blog, Practical fMRI, The Nuts and Bolts. He's also very active on Twitter under the handle @PracticalFMRI as an outspoken advocate for good practices in medical imaging. We're still trying to find our voice, which is why I really wanted to talk to you. I feel like open science is a little bit of a bubble. I want to step outside of it, see how people that are not necessarily working with open science view it, and just get conversations going that are not necessarily directly related to open science, but definitely contribute.
Okay, all right.
So how's everything over there?
Yeah, pretty good, pretty busy. I'm catching you up on the beard stakes. I'm just being lazy. It's midwinter. Yeah. No, things are going pretty well. Busy. We've got a few new projects this year, which are some ultra fast fMRI, which is actually not fMRI per se, but we're using fMRI, which is kind of fun, looking at head injury and doing some perfusion. So ASL has been big this year, and things are trucking on. I'm even getting back into some spectroscopy, Back to the Future.
Wow, how fast is ultra fast?
We're doing 25 frames a second. The application requires that I can sample. So basically my Nyquist needs to be somewhere around 20 hertz. My sampling rate needs to be about 20 hertz. I want to see things up to about 10 hertz, and I want a little bit of buffer. So that's sort of our specification to kick off. So it's just single slice right now, but it's interesting, and we're sort of we're inverting the signal to noise equation. So we're basically looking at physiological effects, right? So we're treating the ongoing neural activity as if it's not there. We're just ignoring it. And then we're over flipping. We're using a lot of inflow effects. And we see these really interesting patterns in the ventricles because of the pressure wave. And then the idea is to try to use essentially the same methods that Blaise Frederick has used in recursively tracking lags for slow waves, like with arterial CO2, but just to apply it to blood pressure waves. And so if we consider that the method should be agnostic to the TR, it doesn't matter if it's 2000 or 40, it's really a case of stepping through in what correlates with what, and can we make meaningful statistical comparisons and interpret these results. So we're sort of shifting to this ultra fast look at blood dynamics, basically. It's kind of fun.
Cool.
Yeah.
So the reason I thought of interviewing you is I saw a tweet, and your tweet was "Be helpful," and it was well received, and there was quite a lot of discussion about what being helpful means. So I guess I'll first start without even mentioning open science. What does being helpful mean to you?
There were some interesting discussions from that tweet. Of course, with just two words, you can interpret it however you like. And that's probably what most people did. It's obviously reflective. You reflect on your own circumstances, and that's how you respond, right? But then after you asked me to do the interview, I actually did ponder the idea of open science a bit more and how it relates to being helpful. And I thought, well, why, Stikov, I don't do open science. I'm not an open science seller, right? That's data sharing and code, GitHubs and stuff, right? And I thought, well, hang on a minute. No, I mean, in a broad case, my blog is open science, because if I find something that I think is useful to somebody, I just simply tell the world about it. I write it sometimes for my own benefit to clarify my thoughts, and sometimes it's for the local benefit. I've got 15, 20 people who might need to know this in my local area, my local users, but it takes the exact same amount of time for me to write and distribute that to 15 people locally as everybody on the planet. So
and you've been blogging for how long?
Since 2010.
Years, 2010. I saw you have 7 posts in 2010. I noticed.
Yeah, and that's right. And I came in with a big backlog. You'll see there's a big bolus. So the original idea was it was going to be a textbook, and so I decided I'd written I'd written a novel in 2009. So then I was like, okay, I need a new project, and so
can we find the novel somewhere?
Maybe, but I'll let you know offline. It is available on Bubble. It's called Bubble Chamber. It's on
Cool.
it's on Amazon. But anyway, it is under a nom de plume because I didn't want to insult anybody. So 2010. So I sort of went into 2010 casting about for a new project and decided I'd been teaching fMRI physics for a decade at that point, and so I figured I'd refined it to the point where I think I knew what works for graduate level psychologists who don't have chemistry background, physics background. And so that was the original idea, was to sort of get this material out in a form that was useful to them immediately, while I took the multiple years to get the textbook ready. I didn't want people to have to wait while I got the chapters out, right? So then, of course, you start getting the feedback and you realize that actually being online, a blog or a web-based medium is the perfect vehicle for an fMRI or MRI. Is neuroimaging, it's pictures, videos, it's color. So so that ability to control the content and the speed of the content was it sort of took it over a life of its own. And so I shelved the book idea completely. I'll never do that. But the motivation from the blog, the help pages or the help blogs that weren't necessarily things that you would find in a primer textbook. Let's say, like I just did on using a 12-channel coil for multiband. That philosophy, that being helpful philosophy, came out of my graduate school experience. I got very fortunate. I was actually the only other place I considered to go to graduate school was Stanford. They probably wouldn't have taken me, but this is when Makovsky had his empire. So this is the mid-late 80s.
But so we could have been colleagues, huh?
We could have been colleagues. But I got very lucky in that my college in London, they hired Steve Williams in my final year as an undergrad. They hired Steve Williams right out of Cambridge. He was Laurie Hall's first PhD student at Cambridge, just before Peter Jazard and all those other guys. So there was a whole big crew of them that I knew. And so Steve dropped into my college and was then responsible for setting up an intercollegiate research service for University of London wide. And bear in mind that it was a 4.7T Cisco system, variant Cisco system. And it was Steve and me. Well, Steve's only a few years older than me, and he had a girlfriend in Switzerland at the time, and he had to travel and go to meetings and stuff. And so who was in charge when he was away? Me. So I got to work with all these extraordinary people, often in areas that I knew nothing about, and I just had to sort of make the best of it. So I got used to plugging holes or trying to do the best I could. And sometimes it would be reactive and sometimes proactive. And most of the time I was out of my depth, but the education that I got was to recognize that if you see a problem and you can be helpful and move something forward, then people will call you back. They'll offer you jobs. It's a pretty easy way to find a career path. So I perpetuated that model without really consciously thinking about it until probably the early 2000s. It was just what I did. But when I look back now, I can see this common thread through my career, to the point where when I was at University of Florida, before I came to Berkeley, I put in the 11.7T wide bore, 40 centimeter. I'd never put in a magnet system before. I knew roughly what superconductivity was, but there was nobody else. So I just got into it. And that mentality of sort of just simply trying to plug a hole, doing your best was very useful to me. It gave me exposure to problems that I wouldn't otherwise have been exposed to. And I learned skills that I wouldn't have learned otherwise. It does mean that I'm a little bit, shallow. I've got a lot of breadth, maybe not so much depth. But over the years, those skills have been translatable. And without sort of realizing it, I had learned how to become a project manager, how to prioritize, things like that. And so that really was sort of what I've been sort of trying to capture and push out in the blog and in tweets and other things. We have another local endeavor called the Siemens Neuro User Group. It's the NorCal SNUG, Siemens Neuro User Group. And the idea is that everybody in the Bay Area who has Siemens equipment, we should be talking to each other, because we're all facing fundamentally the same problems, whether it's a Prisma or a Trio or whatever. The applications differ. Sometimes the hardware differs, but it only differs in the second or third degree. It's not, we're not doing X-ray and MRI. So again, those models have been very, very helpful. You pay it forward, but you get it back because people will educate me and so on. So that's sort of been my be helpful model.
So going back to your blog posts, and there's more than 100 on there.
Okay, thanks for counting.
They are out there. Anybody can read them, but they're not, at least at the moment, recognized as contributions that would lead to promotion, to grants. Is this something that bothers you? Do you think that this kind of content is something that should be more appreciated by promotion committees? And would that change your mind about doing things slightly different?
So it doesn't bother me personally, but then I'm very much closer to retirement than graduation, right? And so I don't have to worry about the consequences. I think one of the reasons why I like the way I blog is because I have control. And there's a reason why I don't have ads on there, and I just simply refuse all apparent or real conflicts of interest because I want the flexibility. I need that freedom. I wouldn't necessarily want to feel like there was somebody scrutinizing something for other reasons than it's useful to them or not. So sometimes I have to do things in a hurry. Sometimes they're not nearly as circumspect as I might like to make them, and I wouldn't want to think, oh my goodness, I could get this may not be as good as it could be. Somebody may be disappointed in me because I didn't do something. So I think there is a danger in making it a formal part of an evaluation process. The other thing is that there's always feedback mechanisms. So although you may not necessarily get the direct credit, there are very good ways to get indirect credit for things. And I think that for me personally, that is enough. But again, as I figured out from the conversations after that tweet, it really very much depends on who you work with, what your career position is, how far along you are in your career path, and how many controlling people you work with.
On that discussion, basically, that was, the people that are very helpful might actually get screwed in the long run because they don't get properly acknowledged. Like that was really the pushback on the be helpful message. And I guess it's a fair message.
It is, but I mean, I personally don't know anybody who's been screwed over by being too helpful, whereas I can, and I'm not going to mention, I'll try not to mention anybody else's names, but I am aware of, because I'm guilty of it myself, I am aware of withholding information from people who are unhelpful. So the corollary to that can be very costly. And most people will not know about it because it's a passive-aggressive move. But people who insist on ownership and control and being paid up front, whether that's through a paper or whatever, those people don't get my calls. They don't get helped. I don't go above and beyond for them. So, there's definitely a two-way street. But I have yet to come across anybody who has been, there might be some, one or two examples, but as a matter of philosophy, all of the people I know who have been open and helpful have ended up being very successful, not the opposite.
Fair enough. And I really like that message as a kind of catchphrase for the podcast. Actually, I switched to phone just to make sure that the connection is clear. Yeah. So I think there won't be any pauses now. So you and I met because we had been interacting on Twitter with the Highlights Initiative for MRM, for Magnetic Resonance in Medicine. And then I was visiting the Bay Area, and we agreed that I'll just come and visit you and chat in person. And then you introduced me to JV Pauline. In the end, JV ended up coming here in Montreal, and him and I are now working together on getting a publishing platform off the ground.
Yeah.
So you have been the seed for many initiatives that are related to publishing. My contact with JB being one of them. The other actually suggesting we do a special issue on microstructure because you were following us tweeting from a conference about microstructure that happened in Montreal. Talk to me about publishing. How do you view the world right now? What do you think could make publishing better in the future?
Oh, golly. I'm not sure I have good answers for you. So I don't have to write papers myself very often. I do it really for my own benefit, right? Because I like to feel like I've completed a project. I don't need it for career reasons. But I have had some recent interactions. I've published a few papers recently, and they've all been fairly good experiences. So I have to say that I'm actually somewhat sanguine about the state of at least neuroimaging journals. I think the review process still works reasonably well, and it's been reasonably timely. I can also I will name some names. It came across recently. I found out that Journal of Cerebral Blood Flow and Metabolism is one of the journals that holds their publications for over a year. So you could have a paper accepted in October of 2018, and it may not come out until an early 2020 publication date, even though it's available online. And they're doing this to game the impact factor, because they only have two.
Many publishers
journals
do that.
That's right. So that needs to change, because that's just complete and utter BS. I don't think many of the neuroimaging journals I'm aware of are playing those games, even though Neuroimage is in Elsevier. I've had some interactions with Peter Van der Tine when he was the editor, and with golly, I'm blanking on his name, the Australian guy Mike Breakspear. And I think they've run a really good ship. So in spite of the Elsevier issues, I think that the journal is in good hands and is being well run. So I think that our traditional journals are reasonably in good shape. I don't know about other sort of initiatives, sort of more something that would be between a free-flowing blog and a traditional paper. I have done a couple of publications through the Winnower before it got bought and sort of became a piece of some other platform. Yeah, and it was really just as an exercise, just sort of testing to see if I could get DOIs on things, because sometimes it's nice to have that permanence on a blog. So that was a good test. But yeah, I think anything that can accelerate the discourse is probably good. I think it's really troubling, given that we're supposedly all online and super rapid now, that our total turnaround for the average publication before the public sees it is slower than it was 60 years ago. That just is weird. When people were using typewriters and didn't have Xerox machines, and they were sending it out hard copy. So this is bizarre to me. So it's fine for some results to spend a year or two languishing in review and whatever, but some of this stuff is pretty much mission critical. And I think that we do need to look at the time aspect. I think much more than the impact factor per se, or any of these other scoring things. All of these scoring things get gamed anyway. They become a raison d'etre, which is always dangerous.
There's a law that says the moment something becomes a metric, that's when it gets recognized as a metric, it stops being useful as a metric.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so yeah, we have to be careful of that. But I think in general, faster turnaround is good. I like the modern, and this has happened really relatively recently. 2 years ago, if you had uploaded a paper to the bioarchive, people would looked at you sideways. Nowadays, they look at you sideways.
It's the norm, yeah.
Don't, and that's great. That's a really quick shift. Yeah.
So definitely that adds transparency to the process. And there's another aspect of transparency that, again, has been very controversial, at least on social media at the moment, which is transparency in the peer review process. Is there such a thing as too much transparency? And I guess you're aware about the discussions that were happening
yeah.
with regard to Nico Krigas-Korte and Brad Love. And it really made me think hard about, is too much transparency a bad thing? Would you advocate that reviews be public? Would you advocate that reviews be signed?
I think that reviews themselves, the actual reviews, could be useful. They could be they're a part of the process, and there could be some very useful insights in the reviews that don't find their way into the final paper, right? And so that would be good for the reader to have. So I think that's potentially a useful development. It's not essential, but it would be potentially useful in some circumstances. As far as anonymous or signed reviews go, I'm a strong proponent of anonymity. And again, I'm not going to name names, but I can, in very, very short order, I can give you a short list, or a long list of people who I would not trust to not be vindictive if they were given a bad review or something that they perceived to be a bad review. And I don't work with that many people. And so, if I know that many people, goodness knows how that would tie for anonymity.
I wanted to talk to somebody who has a lot of experience being helpful, sharing content with the world, but never really considering himself an open science advocate, even though I would say that you have been, and you have been an inspiration to many people for a long time. Is there anything that you would be curious about, or anything that I haven't asked you that you think would be appropriate for the open science audience?
No, I think you've probably made the best point, which is that open science is not a compartment. It's a process. It's a way of approaching life. You can't label it. It's not blue or round. And so it's more like pornography. You know it when you see it. So,
when you see it.
yeah, and so it's all in your perception. And I think that that's a really important point, because I think there are a lot of things that could be construed as open science that are not. And we have siloed data sharing and code sharing as the open science model. But I think that a much broader perspective could be helpful.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.